In a small village located in the local administrative area, a brutal crime occurred. A 6-year-old girl was lured by a friend from the village, then subjected to abuse and torture. The crime scene was horrific. What was even more terrifying was that the girl remained conscious throughout the ordeal, and when discovered, she still had a faint breath. Years later, the verdict of the case caused widespread outrage. The perpetrators were all young people from the village, the oldest being only 14 and the youngest just 9 years old. However, the result of the trial was not the end. The aftermath of the case was even more devastating than people had imagined. The victim in this case was named Luanan. After surgery, the girl was bedridden for a long time before she could stand up. But from then on, she would have to live almost her entire life dependent on a urinary bag. The perpetrators, because they were under 14 years old, were not held criminally responsible but were only required to pay compensation for damages through their families. Once everything was over, they immediately left the village. One of them moved to a small town near the district, while another went to a different city with their parents for business. It seemed like, except for the victim, no one truly faced any consequences. But the tragedy did not stop there. One day, we received a notification from the Serious Crime Unit of the neighboring city. A severe homicide case had occurred and required investigative support. Team Leader Lao Tu assigned me to follow this case closely. Along with me were Team Leader Zhang and Officer Ho. Both were veteran investigators with many years of experience in solving crimes. Right from the initial exchange of information, we learned that this was a massacre case of terrifying proportions in the city. The family of 3 victims included Lu Kuang, the father, Lu Tuk Mai, the mother, and Lu Du Daik, their 10-year-old son. The method of killing was incredibly brutal. Each of the victims had received no less than 20 stab wounds. Moreover, traces of a hallucinogenic substance were found in their bodies. This meant the murderer had used drugs to render the victims in a state of confusion before stabbing them to death. To make matters worse, the killer also decapitated all 3 victims and placed their heads neatly on a tea table in the living room as a form of anger release. The bodies were arranged neatly in a row, perfectly aligned. Because this family had no relatives or friends in the area and lived in a remote rural house, it took a week before anyone discovered the crime due to the overwhelming stench of decay, which caught the attention of passers-by. The police launched an investigation and initially concluded that the murderer was likely someone familiar with the victims, as there were no signs of forced entry or burglary. The crime scene had been thoroughly cleaned, with no fingerprints, footprints, or hair left behind, no evidence at all. This area was quite remote, and the security camera system was sparse, making it impossible to obtain any helpful footage. This made the investigation incredibly challenging. The police could only investigate the relationships of the victims to find leads. 2 significant details emerged during the investigation. First, the victims had only recently moved to this area a few months ago and had no relatives or friends nearby. Second, their son, Lu Du Daik, was one of the perpetrators in the child abuse case years ago. Yes, this was the same case involving Luanan, a case of intentional injury by minors. All signs pointed to this being an act of revenge. And since the victims had once caused harm, Team Leader Zhang immediately suspected Luanan's parents, Lu Tri Hung and Deep Ton Na. However, without direct evidence, we could only summon Lu Tri Hung for questioning. To our surprise, Lu Tri Hung refused to come to the police station, citing his need to take care of his daughter and the inability to arrange time. However, he agreed to let the police come to his home for questioning. We scheduled the meeting for the next afternoon, and I, along with Team Leader Zhang and Officer Lu, immediately set off to visit Lu Tri Hung's house. Lu Tri Hung lived in a modest mud brick house in the village. There was an old well in the yard, indicating that his living conditions were not prosperous. The living room was messy, suggesting the family's difficult life. Lu Tri Hung appeared haggard, with disheveled hair and an unshaved beard, his eyes dull and tired. He showed no resistance to our presence. We sat down, and before we could speak, he began to lament his difficult situation. Whether it was money or time, he was lacking. Since taking care of his daughter, he could hardly go to work, and even after his daughter was discharged from the hospital, he couldn't resume working due to various reasons. The situation became even more dire when his wife, Deep Ton Na, could not handle the hardship and left a long time ago, her whereabouts unknown. Now, only he and his daughter, Luanan, remained in the house. Although she could walk again, Luanan was diagnosed by doctors with severe autism due to the trauma. When he spoke of this, Lu Tri-hung even showed us his daughter's medical records. In addition to the diagnosis, the doctors advised against her being exposed to strangers for a short period. Due to her young age, her psychological recovery was very slow, and too much contact with strangers could worsen her condition. As a result, she rarely left her room. This also explained why Lu Tri-hung could not leave the house to come to the police station for questioning. Without direct evidence linking him to the massacre at the Lu Du Dike family's house, team leader Zhang only asked him a few probing questions, but we didn't find any evidence suggesting that he had left the village. The results confirmed this. Every day, he asked a neighbor to buy food for him, so he had no time to go to the neighboring city to commit the crime. The distance between the crime scene and Lu Tri-hung's house was quite far, and the travel time alone would take at least 5 hours. Not to mention, he would have had to scout the area, monitor, plan the break-in, and then commit the murders. Yet, the crime scene had been cleaned perfectly, making it nearly impossible for a single person to have done everything in such a short amount of time. We met the neighbor who helped, an elderly man over 70 named Zhang Nanmin. Although elderly, he was still quite sharp and healthy. He confirmed Lu Tri-hung's statement and even presented a ledger of daily expenditures when he went to buy groceries. With this concrete evidence, we could nearly conclude that Lu Tri-hung was not capable of committing the crime. He had not left the village and certainly could not have left his daughter alone to go murder someone. But what about Deep Ton Na? No one knew where she was, and perhaps this was the most crucial lead in the investigation. However, before we could follow her trail, another incident occurred. Another serious homicide case took place right in the center of the district, and we immediately went to the crime scene. This crime was extremely brutal. The murderer, in broad daylight, cut the throat of a 12-year-old child. The crime took place at around 4:30 p.m. The crime scene was on a street near a primary school, where many students passed by. The victim was Tu Hahoa, a 6th grade student. When the crime occurred, she wasn't alone, she had 2 classmates with her. Due to the heavy foot traffic around, no one suspected anything. According to eyewitnesses, the murderer was a young woman dressed in a black outfit, with a mask covering her face. She followed Tu Hahoa.